Greetings and salutations, digital world. Welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later, the first of quite a few episodes coming at you this week. All movie reviews, I think. Yes, they are all movie reviews. I'm excited for all of them. Some of the stuff I'll be reviewing this week are things that I have been anxiously anticipating for quite some time. Others were a delightful surprise to know that they are in fact out already. There may even be 4. It really depends on, at the end of the week, if I've got a 4th episode in me or if it'll be a layover until next week. You'll just have to wait and see regarding that. But today, we're doing a review of a movie that dropped on Disney Plus last Friday, I think in most countries. As I said when I was talking about this last week, there was a little confusion as to who was going to get it. I certainly got confused. I opened up my Disney Plus on Friday morning and it said, "Hey, movie's available, stream it now." It's like, oh, cool. And then when I opened it, it's like, no, not yet, stream it later. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. But luckily it did end up dropping here in Australia at 7 p.m. on the 18th. It is Disenchanted, the long awaited sequel to 2007's Enchanted, starring Amy Adams, Patrick Dempsey, James Marsden, and I guess Idina Menzel. Certainly more for this one than the last one. So it's only on Disney Plus. So if you don't have Disney Plus, I guess you're out of luck. Unless there are other ways to watch things. I wouldn't know about that. But yes, exclusively there. So it won't be in the cinemas, but it's one of the Disney Plus's exclusive things. So I'm worried that I'll never see it on DVD. I'll just have to wait and see. And a lot of excitement for this one. I think for a lot of people, Enchanted is a very well cherished movie from a lot of people around my age who were in high school when this movie came out in 2007. If you've never heard of Enchanted, it stars Amy Adams. It came out in 2007, and it's a very fun, magical, silly Disney musical where Amy Adams plays Giselle, who is quite literally a Disney princess. She's literally a cartoon that lives in this magical land of Andalasia. When Enchanted kicks off, she's going through all the motions that a princess would do. And she's not a princess, but she follows that path of running into the handsome, wonderful Prince Edward, played by James Marsden. He's everything that she's ever dreamed of, everything that she's ever told is going to be her future in her magical life. But the evil villain of the story, played by Susan Sarandon, was like, I'm not having that. And her way of exacting some sort of spell or curse on Giselle was literally to push her into the real world, where everything becomes live action, and Giselle literally becomes Amy Adams, who climbs out of a manhole in the middle of Times Square and runs straight on into Patrick Dempsey's Robert and his young daughter Morgan. What follows after that is a lot of mayhem on several different fronts. Either you've got Giselle living with Patrick Dempsey and daughter while she tries to accumulate to her new life and figure out how to get back, but also, of course, learning that there's more to life than just the fairy tale life, and falling in love with Patrick Dempsey, all of that stuff. And then you have hot on her heels both Susan Sarandon as the evil villain who is determined to make sure she doesn't come back, and James Marsden also shows up in the real world, and his prince is lovably stupid and naive and bumbles around New York trying to find her with a talking chipmunk who can no longer talk once he's in the real world. I cherish this movie. It's interesting. It's one of the last movies I can remember that I've gone to the cinemas with my mother to see. She doesn't go to the cinemas with me anymore because I treat it very seriously, and she's very specific movies interest her, whereas I go every other week. But I do remember she was the one who asked me if I would go see this with her, and I remember thinking, oh, whatever, I don't care. But the movie itself was just this magical, wonderful thing. The music was incredible. There were some wonderful songs that stuck in your head, that still stick in your head to this day. A very interesting idea, an interesting concept of a Disney princess in the real world, and that clash of cultures and ideology and all of that stuff as well. The story itself was great. The direction was great. And the actors really sold it. Very specifically, Amy Adams and James Marsden. Their portrayal of the fairy tale characters in the real world was just incredible. Amy Adams really sold being a lost, naive Disney princess trying to navigate the violent city of New York. And James Marsden as well, who literally will jump into a path of cyclists to start singing at them and then just gets mowed down by them. Everybody gave 110% into that movie, and I think it didn't expect to do too well, and it became this massive hit that everybody's held on to for years afterwards. So naturally, as we do with all things, we can't just leave it alone. We have to make a franchise out of it, or make a sequel at the very least. I don't know the powers that be behind Disney that went Disenchanted, the sequel to Enchanted, should only go to Disney+. Although recently I read the news about the Disney CEO reflip of Bob Iger coming back or whatever because streaming lost money. I don't know. Maybe it's a strategic plan to really, really get people to get Disney Plus and focus on Disney Plus. Let's release one of the most wanted sequels of all time on exclusively Disney Plus. That said, I was intrigued by the trailer. I didn't want to see too much about it, but it did look like Enchanted was doing something brave with its sequel, moving in a different type of direction and doing different things with its characters rather than just the same thing again. The basic plot of Disenchanted is it picks up about 15 years after Enchanted. Giselle is living with Robert and Morgan in New York in the real world, while James Marsden's Edward absconded back to Andalasia with Robert's former girlfriend and now love of his life, whose name I do not remember, but she was played by Idina Menzel. But obviously, things aren't always perfect. The big theme of this movie is that happily ever after, nothing ever happened to your characters ever again once they hit that. Everything was happy. But in New York, happily ever after isn't always happily ever after. Life does continue. Giselle and Robert have a kid. They're very busy. They're run down. Morgan has grown into a teenager and is being the usual teenager trope of distant and sarcastic. So Giselle sees an ad for a place called Monroeville, which looks exactly like one of her villages from Andalasia. So she convinces everybody to pack up and move to the suburbs. When she gets there, things do not go swimmingly as like she would expect. Robert's not enjoying having to get on the train to go all the way back to New York for work. Morgan doesn't fit in at school. The town itself is run by this bitch of a woman played by Maya Rudolph and her underlings played by Yvette Nicole Brown and Jamie Mays, who ridicule and persecute Giselle and take advantage of her naivety. And finally, when all things come to a head, luckily, not long ago, James Marsden and Idina Menzel popped back up for a visit and left a magic wand that could grant a true daughter of Andalasia whatever wish she wants. So Giselle goes, cool, I wish life was a fairy tale. Immediately, everything changes. Monroeville becomes a land in a fairy tale, with Robert becoming a swashbuckling adventurer in need of rescuing people. Maya Rudolph's Queen Monroe becomes the evil queen that you would expect from a fairy tale. But there's some hiccups, including the fact that Giselle may, if she's not careful, actually turn into an evil stepmother. Shenanigans ensue. And of course, whether or not things will work out, you'll just have to watch the movie to find out. Did I like this movie? I did. I liked it quite a bit. I don't know exactly what I was expecting. I will say this, whoever made the movie must have been a big fan of Once Upon a Time. The town of Monroeville that Giselle moves to literally could be the exact same place they shot Once Upon a Time, I'm not sure. And the whole concept of real life people taking on fairy tale characters and personas, very Once Upon a Time sort of stuff. But Once Upon a Time was a guilty pleasure movie of mine. It was a ridiculous show. It made no sense. It was all over the place. But I loved every second of it for the most part. So all good. I'm on board with that. And I do like that they're doing something different. They're doing we did fairy tale in the real world. What if we did real world becomes fairy tale? Like it's a unique concept that I don't think people sort of expected the movie to go in. So that's pretty good. the highlights of this movie again are Amy Adams. She's absolutely killing it as Giselle. She throws herself into the role again, really pushes and makes you believe that she is a Disney princess in real life. But I do like that they changed the concept of her character to suit the curse. And Amy Adams can flip between being, oh goodness me, I'm so happy and lovely, to this sinister stepmother who's like, I am evil and I enjoy being evil. I enjoyed when she did a lot of that, the flips between the two. I liked her facing off with Maya Rudolph when they became this whole thing about who was actually going to be the villain of Monroeville. They had a pretty cool song, which I enjoyed. Everybody else as well looks like they're having a lot of fun, which I can appreciate for a movie like this. You cannot do a movie with fairy tale characters in the real world and just not be that interested in making it believable. The story was pretty good. Amy Adams as Giselle was great as always. I've enjoyed the whole fairy tale and the real world stuff. And the music, while not as iconically memorable as Enchanted, are still pretty solid. There's some pretty good songs in here. You watch it and you feel like you're watching a musical. And I have a soft spot for musicals. Even if the movie's terrible, when people start breaking into song, generally I start having a good time. I didn't know this, but it was pointed out to me. Idina Menzel did not sing at all in Enchanted. She didn't think she sung a single song. She might have gone, once, but they make up for it in this movie. I think she sings more than 50% of the songs in here. If it's not Amy Adams singing, it's Idina Menzel. And she's got a very powerful voice. We all love her in Elsa. So every song that she sings, regardless of how cheesy the words are that she's singing or how silly, she absolutely sells it. So a couple of songs I've added to my Spotify and I have listened to a few times since watching it last Friday. So the movie succeeded in that. It has two major flaws for me, which stopped me giving it really, really high marks. The first one being it's overstuffed and too long. The movie is over 2 hours. And it takes a long time to get to really anything. There's a lot of setup. There's a lot of spinning wheels in the middle. And then everything's sort of rushed in the end, which is ironic considering the runtime. But I do remember at one point I went, we must be about halfway through the movie. And I looked and it had only been about 37 minutes. So that's never really a good sign. But I think it's because it's one of those things that a lot of sequels have, which is this constant need that every character that was in the first movie needs to come back for the sequel. And they all need to have their own storyline and their own thing going on, which leads to an overstuffed runtime. The movie needed to focus primarily on Giselle and her stepdaughter Morgan and the ramifications of turning Monroeville into a fairy tale. But we have a whole other side story with Patrick Dempsey trying to be a hero, looking for his heroic moment. And while it's entertaining to see Patrick Dempsey go from the guy who doesn't believe in fairy tales to being a full-on fairy tale character, a lot of his scenes did not connect to anything that was going on, tended to drag on for too long. It was weird. I sort of felt like Patrick Dempsey, he needs to be in the movie because he is Giselle's husband at this point. But it's sort of like they didn't know how to work him into the main story, so they just shunted him away to do something else, just so he can be around when they need him to come back at the end. Still entertaining, but it's stuff like that that makes you go, this is why the movie's too long, and this is the sort of bloated stuff that does make you start to lose interest if things aren't cooking from A to B to C to D and keeping you entertained and all that. And it's not just Patrick Dempsey. There are a couple of other little characters in here which are funny. I like new characters, but sometimes we stay with them a little bit too long. Alan Tudyk voices a scroll of parchment, which is supposed to give Giselle answers as to what the repercussions of her making her wish are, which is fine. But there's this whole introductory thing about learning who he is and why he does what he does. And then we go through it all again when Maya Rudolph gets a hold of him as well. And there's a whole thing wanting to rescue him. It's just sort of stuff which is good idea on paper. But then you put it all together in a movie and you go, okay, where would we start losing people? This is the sort of stuff. So that's all really. I don't feel like sitting down and rewatching it right away because of that. I'm sure if I give it a bit, I will come back to it and go, yep, cool. But Enchanted is a solid point A to point B, point C. And even when we cut away to James Marsden's adventures, it's important to what's going on with Giselle's story, because if I recall, he had Timothy Spall as his sidekick, and Timothy Spall was actually a secret bad guy who was helping out Susan Sarandon. Which brings me to my other main problem with the film, which is ironic considering I just said it's a bit bloated and there's too many characters. But James Marsden's hardly in the film. He has two scenes where he's live action, and then a couple scenes where he voices his character in Andalasia. But Enchanted was great because of Amy Adams. She was fantastic. But for me, and I think for a lot of people, what we loved the most was the goofy, silly charmingness of James Marsden's Edward. Him running around in the real world and causing all sorts of havoc. And even when he shows up in the movie, he immediately brings that energy and spark that makes you remember why you liked him as a character and who he was in Enchanted. But he shows up, he hands over the wand, as I said in the past, he says some funny things, then he disappears for about an hour and 20 minutes. He's gone. And then when him and Idina Menzel do show up again, not too much of a spoil to say, but the wish that has affected Monroeville fairy tale wise is having a negative impact on Andalasia and the people who live there. Morgan ends up there to try and convince everybody to come help her with Giselle, but they're having their own issues. Anyway, after a big old song by Idina Menzel, she joins up with Morgan to go back and says, Edward, come with me. And he says, someone has to stay behind. I don't know why he has to stay behind, but it was very upsetting to have to wait that long for him to come back and then for him to not be there. And then he shows up for a final scene at the end. Again, he brings that energy which makes you miss him, make you go, I wish you had been in this movie more than 10 minutes. Now, I don't know why. It could be an issue with scheduling. Maybe James Marsden was filming some other stuff. I don't know if Sonic the Hedgehog 2 took up too much of his time to come and film this. But then it becomes an issue of, if you can't have him for more than 10% of the film, just don't have him. You got plenty other stuff going on as well. Don't have him in it in such a small way, but advertise that he's going to be a big way, because all it's going to do is make people miss him and make people wish for something that they inevitably didn't get. That said, that's just a pet peeve from me because of the James Marsden love. But I do feel like a lot of people have the same attitude that I do. If I Google James Marsden right now, a lot of the articles say, why wasn't James Marsden in Disenchanted for more than 5 minutes? And stuff like that. At the end of the day, though, it's still a solid sequel to Enchanted. It's better than I expected it would. It makes some brave choices in what it wants to do with its story. And it's sold again by an incredible performance from Amy Adams and some incredible songs that really showcase how fun it is to watch a Disney musical. I give it a 7 out of 10. I do recommend it, especially for people who love Enchanted. You will probably enjoy this film. If you haven't seen Enchanted, this one's probably not for you. It'd be weird to watch it. Either you wouldn't know what's going on, or it would just get on your nerves. But Enchanted for sure. It's a good, solid follow-up that we didn't really need, but it's okay that we have, if that sums it up for you in a nice, neat bow. There, well, thank you very much for listening. If you, well, I hope you enjoyed listening, but also thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. I will be back either Wednesday or Thursday for my next review. Just depends whether I want to do the review as soon as the movie's over or give it a bit to think. But I'm going to one of those exclusive screenings that's only happening this week for Glass Onion, which is the sequel to Knives Out, starring Daniel Craig as the wonderful detective Benoit Blanc. It's only in cinemas for a week, so if you like if you like Knives Out and you want to see this movie, your local cinema will probably be showing it, and there's probably still tickets available. If you can't get to it this week, though, it will be available on Netflix around Christmas time. But I'll be getting in there first, and I'll be giving you my review, so you know one way or another if you want to watch it, or if you want to defy me if I say to watch it or not watch it. Whatever the case, I'll be back to talk about it. Until then, I love and appreciate you as always. Thank you for listening. I do appreciate it. and I'll catch you on the next Spliced In Later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.